Well, the draft Relationships and Sexuality Education Framework, the RSE framework, was quietly published by the Ministry of Education on Friday, the 11th of April. It was so quiet that the media didn't notice it until 3 days later. And even then, they didn't seem too keen on reporting it. Now, it's what you call a soft launch. The government makes it public on a website, but they don't tell anyone. A little bit like when they changed the research on puberty blockers on the Health Ministry website and removed the false claim that puberty blockers were fully reversible. They weren't too keen on making that public either. But unfortunately for the Ministry of Education, we did notice the release of these guidelines and we told all of our supporters. Let me tell you about it. So the proposed guidelines for RSE are to replace the previous explicit, extreme and age-inappropriate 2020 guidelines that were loaded with radical sexuality, gender ideology, preferred pronouns, and also allowed for schools to hide important health information about students from their own parents. But of course, we threw the spotlight on the material in this and it's being changed. Now, the new framework is now available for feedback and insights from concerned parents and community leaders like you. The Ministry of Education says, quote, the framework sets out the proposed teaching to be covered in RSE each year. The focus is on ensuring RSE content is age appropriate, evidence informed, internationally comparable, and clear about what to teach and when from years 0 to 13. And the consultation period is open until 9th of May, so just less than a month. Now, look, let's be clear. These government-sanctioned programs targeted at children as young as 5 undermine the role and value of parents. Outside groups often use them to push a radical leftist sexuality and gender ideology, and the resources often fail to take into account the emotional and physical development of each child and the values of each particular family. As parents or caregivers, it's our job to be the voices our children trust the most on the topic of relationships and sex. And so we must be courageous and talk about sex, relationships, marriage, abstinence, respect, and consent with our children. And the other significant concern is that no matter what the framework says, if there's any vagueness or wiggle room, radical groups like Inside Out, Rainbow Youth, Family Planning, and other activists will go to the extreme end, often hiding their agenda from parents, as we've exposed over the past 5 years, and which has led to this review. But let's have a look at the specifics of the proposed framework as it stands. And look, there are some positives, but there are some red flags. I think the overall positive is that they've understood that they can't integrate relationships and sexuality education into every subject across the school board so that parents can't monitor what's being taught. That's a definite good start. And for example, they do say on the positive side, ensuring that RSE content is age appropriate. Well, that's important because that's been a key concern about what's being taught to, for example, primary school children. They say, quote, talking about RSE at home with your kids helps reinforce what they learn at school. Actually, it should be the other way around, shouldn't it? And deepens their understanding of themselves and others. Parents and caregivers may also want to have conversations with their children at home first, before explicit teaching happens at school. That's why it's so important that we get this part of the curriculum right. I mean, it's sort of positive, sort of saying about the role of parents, but it's kind of like, parents, you need to get in first before the school pollutes your child's mind. Sort of sounds a bit like that, eh? They say, and this is important, schools still need to talk to parents about their health education plans. And you can choose to take your child out of any part of sexuality education. Now, that's a very good thing. That's the one we are monitoring because it's vital that schools have to consult with the school community. In year 8, ages 12 to 13, they actually say that kids should be told this. New Zealand law sets a legal age of consent for sexual conduct. Well, that's the first time I've seen that explicitly in guidelines, but of course it should be reinforced at all levels. And at year 10, age 14 to 15, it says this, quote, biological sex, for example, chromosomes, hormones, and anatomy, chromosomes, hormonal levels, and anatomy all determine whether people are considered biologically male or female. Woohoo! We are back to biology, baby. So those are some positives. However, there are, as you'd expect, a number of red flags. They say they say research from the Education Review Office undertaken last year found there is too much inconsistency in what RSE is being taught and when, and it often depends on where a child goes to school. But that's the whole issue. Schools are moulding what they teach based on the values of the community, of their local community. And yes, it will differ from community to community, from faith-based school to state school. And look, it's not a bad thing that it's varied across different ages and across different schools, because one size does not fit all. It depends on the values of the child and the local community. In year 4, which is ages 8 to 9, they talk about inclusion. But of course, I mean, what does inclusion mean? It's a buzzword, isn't it? Diversity, equity, and inclusion. In year 6, age 10 to 11, they talk about respecting others' interests and preferences. What do they mean by preferences? Year 8, ages 12 to 13, they talk about sexual attraction and orientation, healthy sexual activity. This is to 12 to 13-year-olds. Can I remind you that they are underage children? And then year 9, 13 to 14, once again, remember the age of the child and the legal age of sexual consent. 13 to 14, they say, quote, they can access support and advice, and when they do, they have rights. For example, doctors must keep what they say confidential. They can get confidential advice and help with sexual health, including where and when to get testing and treatment. They can make informed choices about sexual health, including understanding the different options for preventing pregnancy and STIs, including abstinence. Whoa, here's a new word. And which might work best in different situations. They can access products to ensure safer sex practices and reduce health risks, including when and where to get help when needed. Remind you that it's 13 to 14-year-olds they're talking to, underage, and they're talking about their rights, confidentiality, from who? Well, from parents, of course, safer sex practices. And then they go to year 10, and the guideline, the framework for 14 to 15-year-olds also talks about access products to ensure safer sex practices and reduce health risks, including where and when to get help when needed, get confidential advice, and testing and treatment. Again, note the age of the child, 14 to 15, still underage, talking about confidentiality, keeping it away from parents, getting tested, sexual activity. And there doesn't seem to be a lot of commentary about what about the overwhelming majority of students who have not been sexually active and who are not sexually active. Overwhelming majority, the surveys show. But once again, they're ignored, and it's kind of this harm minimization. Oh, well, you're going to have sex, so here's how to keep yourself safer. They don't say safe sex anymore. They say safer. And then you get to year 11, 15 to 16. They talk about perspectives differ throughout society and across different societies regarding sex, gender, and reproduction. Now, this is the first mention of where they've separated out sex and gender. So it's kind of like gender ideology kicks in around 15 to 16-year-olds, year 11. But I'm sure that outside groups, radical groups, will try and indoctrinate it earlier. And then year 11, this is 15 to 16-year-olds, teach students to know how to sustain a conversation that deepens their individual and collective understanding of safe sexual behaviour, describe strategies for safe participation in sexual behaviour, if choosing to do so, appropriate contraception, prevent unwanted pregnancies, appropriate protection against STIs, and then they say access accurate information and support for themselves or their peers if faced with an unintended pregnancy. What does that mean? Does that mean where to find and how to get an abortion? Or does it talk about pregnancy support? And once again, note the absence of abstinence and any tools to encourage that, despite the fact that surveys show the overwhelming majority of students in the school and in the classroom will be abstaining. Yes, shock horror, they are abstaining. So parents, you can have your say, and it's on a simple SurveyMonkey form, so it's pretty easy to do. But basically for each age group, you'll be asked whether the content is appropriate for that age group. So as a parent, I'd encourage you to check the age groups that your children are in and ask yourself whether you want teachers and even outside groups to be talking to your children about these subjects. And you'll see down the bottom, you can also comment on which material is suitable and which material is not. Now, you can also just go to the final question, which says, quote, "There is no content in the draft RSE framework that should be removed," end quote. Well, we'd encourage you to strongly disagree with that statement. As I've shown you, there are some major red flags in the proposals. There is absolutely some content that must be removed. Oh, a parent sent me this as well. You'll also be asked what describes your role. You'll note that parent is not even included in the list. There's academic, teacher, researcher, well, there's even youth, student, but no parent. Just member of the public or whānau. So I'd encourage you to do what this person did, see down the bottom there, and tick the other box and write parent, just to annoy them, but also to remind them who actually is responsible for raising our children. The ministry needs to hear from you, the parent, because you can be sure that radical groups like Inside Out and Family Planning will be trying to push this framework to its radical extreme. Now, the ministry says that once the consultation closes, feedback will be consolidated into key actions, incorporated into the design of the the whole learning area, and the updated learning area will be released for consultation in term 4 of this year. Well, we'll be ready. And they also say that the updated health and physical education learning area is planned to be gazetted in 2026 and notified to schools and required for use from 2027. Look, be the loudest voice for your children on this topic. Let's not leave the door open for our children to be taught about sexuality and gender theory by the voices of people whose agendas and values don't align with ours. We must speak up for the sake of our children. Go to our website, familyfirst.nz, and you'll see more information and the links. Speak up.